and about how amazing it is, and about how everyone should read it, and about how it should be a mandatory read for all of humanity. Hello everyone and welcome back to Mariana Mass Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with my best books of 2024 video. I have not organized these books in any particular order in terms of ranking. I am going to mention the books as I read them in order. I don't know how many books there are because I haven't planned out this video. I have literally opened Goodreads and I'm going to be checking which books I finished last year. I just at a glance, there are more than I remembered and there are many that I could consider favorites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the list and I'm going to tell you about the ones that are highlights of the year, and they are highlights in terms of how favorite they were, meaning I'm not going to give you a highlight because this book was so bad. It's just the good reading experiences. Before giving you the categories for the new books I read during the year, I wanted to give a shout out to all the rereads I did last year. If you have followed my channel, you know that I didn't used to be a big rereader. Actually, I always said in my videos that I don't reread books. I rewatch a lot of shows and movies, but for some reason I never reread books. And again, for some reason last year, somehow it became the year of the rereads. It was a highlight in itself that I became a rereader, but also a lot of the rereads that I did are some of my favorite books. And I'm not the type of person to say those don't count, but I'm going to give them to you now because I have talked about them before. And in this video, I want to tell you about the books that I had never read before and that are new to me. So I'm just going to tell you about all the ones that I reread because they are favorites. So my first reread was actually the Farseer Trilogy, which I reread with my friend Elle. We body reread together because the year before, in 2023, we finished the entire Realm of the Elderlings series, and so we finished in December with the last of the 16 books, and then in January we reread the first book again. So we finished and we started again and we reread the first 3 books, the first trilogy, which is the Farseer Trilogy, which I'm not going to talk about a lot because I've talked about it a lot and there are a lot of videos about the Realm of the Elderlings. I'm just going to say that if you know this series, most people say that the Farseer Trilogy is their least favorite series and that it's not the greatest. And often I see in groups when someone starts reading the Realm of the Elderlings, people tell them, oh, stick with it, it gets so much better than the Farseer Trilogy. And honestly, it's my favorite trilogy. The Farseer Trilogy is my number one trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, and I could reread it for eternity. Like I could finish it and start again, finish it and start again, finish it and start again. The next book I reread was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez, and that book is honestly it is one of the best books I've ever read. It is a really special book. It won an I mean Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a Nobel Prize winner, so like there's nothing I can say to give you a better recommendation. I'm just going to say that I am so glad I reread it as an adult. I had read it for the first time when I was 18, and I'm really glad I read it now at 35 because I feel like I grasped some concepts or themes rather, some themes that maybe didn't punch as much when I was 18, especially all of the political elements and a lot of the personal elements as well. I am just going to say, if you pick this book up, don't expect to get like a straight up story. It's not a regular novel. It's not a novel like in terms of, like, I couldn't tell you what it's about other than telling you it's about 100 years of a family that lives in a town. It's amazing magical realism, and it is Latin America in a book. I think reading it as a Latin American is super, super special because you know all of the characters in there. You have met people that are like every single one of the characters. You identify moments, you identify things. There are things that I was reading and that made me think of my grandmother. It's super, super special, and I love it to pieces. So yes, 100 years of solitude. And then the next one I reread was The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is the first book in her, I want to say, Five Gods series. I actually haven't finished the series. I want to read the last book this year. But that book is amazing. I think I have a whole video about that book, or a video where I talked at length about it, because I think that it is amazing and revolutionary in how it portrays feminism in fantasy. uh, I have a whole video about it. I'm going to try to find it so I can link it down below. But again, that was also a reread. And finally, and that was in December, From Look Up With Love by Mariana Zapata, which is one of my all-time favorite romances, and I'm embarrassed to admit it because if any of you were to read it, it's honestly like it's not the best. It's not the best. It's one of those romances where if you grew up and if you're a millennial and you were a teenager in a certain time period, and the twilight time period where we believed that toxicity was romantic in relationships, um you are going to love it. But if you have grown out of that, then you won't. Now, it's one of those books where you read something and you are aware that in real life that's not okay. But in a book, your inner teenager takes over, and in the book it's super romantic. Let's just say that, okay? So when I read Mariana Zapata, my inner teenager takes over the wheel, my adult self leaves the building, and my inner teenager adores this book, adores this book. So, yes, that one. Those were my rereads for the year. And now, let's start with the actual books that I read for the first time in 2024. First, I want to give a category for an author because I read a lot of books by her, and I feel like it's the year, 2024 was the year where I 100% consolidated her as one of my favorite fantasy authors, or just one of my favorite authors, period, but she writes fantasy. And that is Lois McMaster Bujold. And I read many books by her, but the books I'm going to talk about are the Penric and the Demon novellas because those were my focus. She has many series, and those were my focus in 2024. I still haven't finished all of the series. I think there are like 7 or 8 books, something like that. I have read several of the Penric and the Demon novellas, and Lois McMaster Bujold is one of those authors who writes a subgenre called hope punk, and hope punk is kind of like the antithesis of the fantasy that focuses on the evil of humans and torture and darkness, and how punk is, characters who are kind, who are generous. The themes are very much about goodness, about kindness, about hope, hope punk, and that is just my jam. It doesn't mean that there isn't any darkness in the books. It just means focusing on the goodness of humanity and not on the badness of humanity, which is why I think that Hope Punk is truly the forward thinking genre, because I feel like at this time in the world that is the new thinking, right? Okay, so moving on, Lois McMaster Bujold, amazing character writer, amazing stories, endearing, heartwarming, funny, good plot, interesting stories, super original concepts. The Five God series in particular, that one has the most amazing religion in world religion in fantasy. And yeah, so Lois McMaster Bujold, I just want to highlight her as an author that truly, truly consolidated her place as one of my favorite authors. Then I want to talk about the most gripping book, the biggest page turner, the one that kept me on the edge of my seat, that I just needed to keep reading to know what was going to happen, and that would be A Drowned Maiden's Hair by Laura Amy Schlitz. It is a middle grade book set in the, I want to say, the early 20th century, I want to say. And if you look at the cover and the title and middle grade, you wouldn't think that it is a page turner, but it totally is. This book is the story of two or three sisters, adult sisters, who are who pretend to be mediums and who pretend to talk to people's dead families, to talk to dead people. They are fakes, they are not true mediums, and they adopt a little girl to help them in their frauds. So they adopt her because they want her to act as a ghost, to act as the dead daughter of a rich lady that they want to con. And so you are following the story of this little girl with these awful sisters who teach her how to act, and who are teaching her to con this poor woman whose daughter died, and she just wants to see her one more time. And you are following that story. So all the story leading to the moment where they are going to put on the performance, there is so much as at stake for the girl. You are so attached to her, and Laura Amy Schlitz, honestly, I think she's also one of my favorite writers. So this one I read for middle grade March, and honestly, amazing. If you like classics and you want to be kept on the edge of your seat, and you think you don't like middle grade but you would like to try, this book is it. Actually, I have a video dedicated to this book, so I'm going to link it down below. Then I'm going to talk about two history books. As you know, I participate in Historathon and I love reading history. So the first one is When Moctezuma Met Cortez by Matthew Restall. I do think that this is now my all-time favorite history book. I think it wouldn't be a popular history book. It is a low-rated history book, and that is because it's one of those books that talks a lot about history while also making reference to how history has impacted art, and people don't seem to like that. For some reason, but I really, really enjoyed it. This book the premise of this book is about the meeting of Cortez, who is the leader of the conquistadors in the Mexico region. Let's put it like that. It's the easiest way to explain it. And Moctezuma, who was the the second to last emperor of the Aztecs. And so it follows their meeting, and then it talks about, from that meeting, it explains the events of the conquest, but from a new lens. Matthew Restal writes new conquest history. So he brings on a new perspective where he questions a lot of the myths, or what I believe to be myths, but he questions a lot of the known truths, right? Like the narrative that has been told through the ages from the perspective of the colonizer. So he puts that into question, and he talks a lot about how the narrative has impacted in different pieces of art, theater, painting, and how that became like a, almost like a trope in people's minds, and how that has shaped the discourse about Mexico, and about in general colonized territories to this day. So a lot of people don't like that when history books talk about the impact of history in the present. I actually think that's like kind of the point of history. But anyway, so one of my favorites, and because that topic is so close to me, you know, being from Mexico, it was super impactful, because it truly is amazing to realize how many of the official narratives I believed to be true, and I just didn't question them until I read this book. And it is honestly amazing to realize that you have lived all your life in this territory that was colonized, and that you have bought into the colonizer narrative for all your life. And most people believe that it's what's taught in schools, and that this book really opened up a whole new world for me in terms of understanding history. Yeah, the history of my country, just putting it that way. And it opened the gate for me, just getting obsessed with the topic and reading a lot of books about the topic. And the next one is The Once and Future Sex by Eleanor Janega, which is about women in the Middle Ages. This one is structured by theme, so each chapter is a different theme. It's super readable, super funny. Eleanor Janega has a podcast, and she is honestly hilarious. You can also look up a lot of videos on YouTube where she talks about medieval history. She is hilarious, and she talks a lot about women in medieval ages. And well, this book is about that. This is another book that completely opened my eyes and changed my perspective about a lot of things, especially about like the way society thinks about women, and certain roles that women have that I feel like most people believe come from the Middle Ages, but in fact come from much later. This book is amazing if you want to learn about women in the Middle Ages. If you don't know anything, this book is great because it's very beginner, very general, very beginner. And if you know stuff, it's also great because Eleanor Janega does bring a new perspective, and she is super funny. I actually listened to this one in audiobook, which is narrated by her, and it's amazing. She is super funny. It's short, it's an easy read, it's a funny read. If you are just generally curious about women in the Middle Ages, you know, go ahead and give this a read. The next award would be the book I've talked about the most, and the book I have shoved down people's throats the most. This is a book that I have talked about in my real life at any excuse, like the littlest excuse in my real life will take me on a spiel about this book, and about how amazing it is, and about how everyone should read it, and about how it should be a mandatory read for all of humanity. And that is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which is a book about the science of sleep. Matthew Walker is a doctor, and that is his his topic of study. This book tells you from the history, like the evolutionary history of sleep, and then it talks about different areas in which sleep affects, or the lack of sleep affects your life. Hint, it's all of them. It's all of them. All of the areas of your life are affected by lack of sleep. Even the ones you don't think have anything to do with sleep, they do. They do, and they are being affected. So this is the type of rant I will go in real life. I will go into in real life thanks to this book. But it's truly, like, honestly, hyperbole aside, it really should be mandatory reading for every human being, and I am now convinced, hyperbole aside, okay, like actually convinced, that the reason why we don't know more about sleep is because of the capitalist system, and because if we were to know more about the effects of sleep, it wouldn't be good for productivity and for capitalism, and that is why this has been hidden from us. It's not even hyperbole. I actually believe that. The next book would be, I think, the book of the year. Yeah, that is my book of the year, and that would be You Dreamed of Empires by Álvaro Enrique, which is a psychedelic comedy about the conquest. It is a weird historical fiction book. It's like a historical fiction that is not really history, but also it's super historical. It follows a historical event, which is the meeting of Cortes and Moctezuma, and then it's basically the imagination of the author of the events of how that went about, and then the ending is just straight up alternate history. So like the plot is not historical, even though the beginning is a historical event, but the details and the setting are extremely well researched. I think that is why I loved it, because you do feel in the time period, which is the time period of the conquest, you know, when the Aztecs were at their height and the Spanish had just come. And because I was reading a lot about the conquest at the moment, I could tell how well researched the book was. Anyway, so this is super funny, but also super amazing in terms of setting and um, place. The sense of place, the way he writes, the way he describes, really makes you feel there. And the story is amazing, it is super funny, and the ending is very cathartic. I'm not going to lie. I also talked a lot about this book in video, so I'm not going to talk about it more. But if you like historical fiction, if you like weird sounding historical fiction, if you are mildly interested in the Aztecs, I would highly recommend this book. If you're one of those people who is into book lists, the New York Times mentioned this in one of their best of the year book lists. I will definitely reread this book at some point, and I want to thank Eva at Eva Strange for recommending this book to me in one of my Historathon Conquest videos. The next category is the book that most impacted me on a profound level, that made me cry, and that taught me about life, and that actually has made me start living differently. Between Two Kingdoms by Suleika Jawad. Between Two Kingdoms is a memoir about leukemia. Suleika, she was diagnosed with leukemia when she was, I think, 23, and she talks about the diagnosis and her experience during the first part of the book, and then the second part of the book follows a project that she did where she went on a road trip across the US to interview different people that also had leukemia. When she was diagnosed, she was a journalist. She was working as a journalist, and so when she gets diagnosed, she starts writing. And during her time in the hospital, she starts writing a blog about her experiences. That blog gets published in a big media. I don't remember which one, but it becomes super famous, and so people start writing back. And a lot of people that have or had leukemia. And so she, in the second part of the book, when she has had her final chemo, she contacts several of the people who wrote back to her, and she goes interview them. This was especially impactful for me because I related a lot to Suleika's story. I have a different health thing, not leukemia, but I was diagnosed when I was 19, so close in age to how she was, and I feel like her context and her goals in life and the path that she saw for herself in life is very similar to the path that I had seen for myself, and that path gets interrupted and it completely changes her life, which happened to me as well. And I feel like a lot of the reflections that she does are things that I have done as well. If you don't know, in my real life, I write and give speaking events and videos and stuff, and I talk a lot about my diagnosis and my illness and my recovery process. And so I've written a lot about it, and a lot of the things that she writes are things that I have written as well. So I was very identified with everything she says. And then the second project reminded me of a project that I also did after my surgery and after I was first released from treatment. I don't know how to say it, where I also interviewed people who had gone through experiences in life. In my case, I did a documentary series. Some of the episodes are actually have English subtitles. I'm going to think about if I want to link them or not, depending on how much cringe it gives me. But I interviewed a lot of people, and so that second part also reminded me of that project. And then the ending reflection that she does, like the thing she learned, is something that I also always say when I do speaking events and stuff. So it made me cry. I was very identified. It impacted me a lot. And the thing is that I am very different from her in that she seems a person that is very adventurous and just says yes and goes for things, and I am not. So I'm very cautious. I'm a very cautious person, and she doesn't seem to be. So she talks about how um those kinds of things where it's like, if I know that I'm going to die, then I'm going to travel through the world, whereas I'm the type of person who is like, I'm not going to travel because maybe that will give me more time to live. um I mean, that's like my mindset. I'm not saying like that specific thing, but the way of thinking, right? And with that book, there's a particular story that I'm not going to bore you with because it's in the book and I'm going to be here forever. But there is a particular story that really impacted me, like, a lot. One of those books that impacts you on a personal level and that actually makes you change your conduct in real life. The message I took from it is like, survival is the least important thing in life. um, and that changes everything if you think about it like that, where if you don't think about life, being alive, as the most important part of life, that completely changes the way you live. um so yeah, very special, very special book for me. The next category is a book that I think is not translated to English. and so therefore I'm going to be quick about it. I actually am skipping some books that are not translated. I'm focusing on the ones that are. If you were to watch my favorite books video in Spanish, there are some differences, but this one I just have to talk about because it's really amazing and I wish it got translated. And it is Cartucho by Nelly Campobello. I talked about this book in my historical fiction wrap up for like a readathon kind of thing that Shelley Swearingen did. I think in the summer, somewhere along those lines. I read this book and I talked about it, so I'm going to link it below. But it is a book about the Mexican Revolution, which is different than the Independence War. The Mexican Revolution was to overthrow a dictatorship in 1910, so beginnings of 20th century. And this book is like a series of vignettes from the perspective of a little girl. The author herself lived through the revolution, so it's kind of like autofiction, although it is kind of like a mystery if it is autofiction. The author has a very interesting life. There could also be like a super interesting biopic or novel written about her life. Oh my god, yeah, like all those novels that are written about Zelda Fitzgerald, that type of thing. I think there could be a novel about her. So I'm just mentioning it because somewhere out there has to do something about this. Either translate this book or research the author and make a biography or a novel or something. The next book I'm going to talk about is the best, most satirical representation of the Middle Ages, and an author I've been wanting to read for ages and I hadn't read until now, but now I'm definitely going to continue reading. That's the category. And the book is Baudolino by Umberto Eco. Baudolino by Umberto Eco, I think on Goodreads it's classified as fantasy, and I've seen a lot of people classify it like that. I think in the app where I listen to the audiobook, it's also classified as fantasy, but I personally would not classify it as fantasy because this is a satire of the Middle Ages, and in the Middle Ages there were a lot of beliefs about certain creatures that existed that don't really exist, and so in this book those creatures are taken for real, but only until the second half of the book, which is why I don't think of it as fantasy. I just think of it as the author writing the Middle Ages as the Middle Ages wrote itself, kind of a thing. So this follows Baudolino, who was a peasant, let's say, in Italy, and one day he gets adopted by the emperor, who is an actual real life historical emperor. And so he gets adopted and you follow his life. Actually, this book is being told from the perspective of Baudolino as an old man. So the book starts when he is at some crusade, I think. He is an old man, so the town he is in has been ravaged by a crusade, and he goes into like protection with another man, and they are talking, and so Baudolino starts telling him about his life, and that is the story we are following. So you follow Baudolino throughout his younger years, when since he gets adopted by the emperor, until his university years. At the middle of the book, he goes on a quest to search for the Grail. It's super funny. It's very funny and very ridiculous. Paolino likes to make stuff up, and he's really good at telling stories. And it's to a point where the stories start to they start to believe the stories that he tells. So it's like he's creating truth by creating stories, and it's super funny because I think it's a commentary on how we read history, where you find documents and historians have these documents, but we have no way to know if these were actually true. And then also, in middle medieval texts, authors loved to write like the events that I'm going to narrate here were found in an old manuscript, blah blah blah, and they were just making it up. It was from an old manuscript. So I feel that this book is also a commentary on that, on the truths that we believe from history. And so there are actually some historical events that are kind of changed in the course of this book because of how Baudolino writes them. There is a particular event with the emperor that I actually learned this from Tristan and the Classics. He has a great review of this book, which I'm going to link below. There is a historical event that happens as it happened in history, but the reason why it happens is because of Baudolino and his friends, and so it's kind of like telling you, oh, this is why this historical event happened, which is very funny. So the whole book is like that. And in his quest to the Grail, he reaches the east eastern lands, and that is where he starts meeting all these creatures, these fantastical creatures that, again, to me it doesn't read as fantasy per se, because it's what people believed was there in the mysterious lands of the East. And so it is very much, okay, this is how the Middle Ages saw itself. So we are keeping it like that. Fantastic book, brilliant book. This is my first Umberto Eco. I'm going to keep reading it. The first chapter of this book is, without hyperbole, the funniest thing I have ever read. I was listening to the audiobook is fantastic. I seriously recommend the audiobook. I want to look what other stuff the narrator has narrated, because he's fantastic. And the first chapter, I was listening to it and just laughing out loud, but just washing dishes, laughing out loud. If people saw me, they would be like, what is wrong with her? Funniest thing I have ever read. And I definitely want to read more from Umberto Eco. Okay, so I just have 3 more to go. The next one I'm going to talk about is the best book in a series that I loved from an author that I have been wanting to read for a long time, but I had never read, and that I'm definitely going to continue reading, and that I can see why she is considered best of her genre. And that is Marrying Winterborn by Lisa Kleypas. Marrying Winterborn is the second book in the Ravenels series by Lisa Kleypas. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because it's a historical romance in like Regency type period, so I think those are pretty generic. But honestly, Lisa Kleypas, I can see why she is such a favorite. I'm definitely going to continue reading her. I think this isn't even her most popular series, and I binged it from the first to the last in like a month via audiobook, and I loved all of them. Not all of them actually. I loved some more than others, but this one, I have 3 favorites, but I think this one would be the one that most sticks in my mind because of the beginning of the book. And I'm just going to say that if you're going to pick up this book, you have to read book 1. This is supposed to be a standalone, but the way it starts, if I had just picked up this book and read it without reading the first one, I would be so... No. Like, the beginning of this book is very questionable what happens, which I think is true for a lot of romance. But if you don't read book one, it's even more questionable. So if you're going to pick this one up, pick book one up. If you like, Pride and Prejudice type stuff, where you have your heroine, actually the heroine for this one is not as rebellious, which I also liked. But the heroes are rich and noble men, but that also question nobility. And actually, the hero of this book is not a member of like a noble family. He owns a department store. So he's looked down upon by high society because he doesn't have a family, he doesn't have a pedigree, but he's very rich. So that's kind of like the premise. He's just one of the best heroes I have ever read. The podcast Fated Mates has a whole episode just talking about this book, which I'm going to link down below. The next category would be new favorite Victorian author. There is an author that I had wanted to read for a long time and I hadn't read it until now, and now I'm definitely going to read more from her. You can see a trend. And that would be Silas Marner by George Eliot. Silas Marner follows like an older, he's not that old, but a man who is a weaver. He's a linen weaver, and he's living in a small town, and he's a loner. He doesn't have friends. He's considered like he doesn't get along with the people from his town, and the people fear him. At the beginning of the book, we know why that happened. We are told the story of this injustice that happened to him as a younger man in the town where he was from, where he had a lot of friends, he was respected in the community, and then an injustice happens and he's forced to leave the town. And so he kind of, after that experience, he stops trusting people. And so immediately you get attached to him because it's one of those characters where this injustice happened to him and you want to go across the pages of the book, get into the book and give him a hug and tell him you didn't deserve that, but you deserve love. So you get attached. And so you follow him, and because he doesn't have any friends, he finds purpose in money. So he loves, through his weaving, he makes a lot of money, and that is his new life's purpose, until something happens. And then during Christmas, this person comes into his life. This young child comes into his life, and it changes him. It's lovely, it's heartwarming, it's funny, so funny, and just George Eliot's writing is amazing. I had highlighted a quote that I was going to read to you for this video, but guess what? I'm super hungry because I always film before I have to eat, and I just want to finish with this video, so I'm not going to read the quote. But George Eliot's writing is magical, just magical, blows you away. It literally blows you away. And I'm definitely going to read more from her. And finally would be my new favorite of all time book. It also made me cry. I wasn't expecting it. I'm going to reread this book. And I'm so happy I read it. And I think about it and my heart melts and explodes and everything. And that is Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. Oh my god, what a book. This book is, let's say it tells two stories. The present timeline, it's not necessarily two timelines. You'll see what I mean, because it's not two timelines, but it's two stories. You'll see what I mean. So the present time for the book is during the pandemic, and you are in the perspective of a adult woman who is telling her daughters, her three daughters, the story of a love she had when she was younger. So that's like the second story. So present time is a pandemic. The daughters are all in university and university and older. But because of the pandemic, they have to come back home and they are all on lockdown. And because they are on lockdown, they're always together. And so the mom starts telling them this story. The mom was an actress when she was younger, and she tells them the story of a summer where she worked on a play. And the time she had during that summer, the love she had, the friends she had, and you are following that story also. So it's kind of like it goes in the different times. You are with her, you are in present time, and then she goes back to telling the story to her daughters, and then she goes back to present time, and then she goes back to telling the story. So you are following both stories and you are invested in both. And you as a reader, you are in the place of the daughters. You are invested in the story and you are hearing the story that their mom is telling. You are in their place and you are invested with the story. You want to know about it, but then also you are invested with the story of the family and you want to know more about it. And as the story progresses and as the book progresses, you will learn more about her life, about their family life. They live in a cherry tree farm, so you follow them while the mom is just telling the story of her life while they're picking cherries, while they are at home, while they're having dinner. It's not a plot heavy book in the sense that there aren't big dramatic events that happen and twists and turns. You're just literally sitting hearing a story from mom about her past, and you are invested in both the present and the past. It is a book about life, about death, about family, about community, about love, about life. It's just a book about life. I always say that I don't like books where nothing happens, but I think I'm finding that I love books where nothing happens when they are not pretentious. I feel like most novels that don't have a plot are pretentious. This type of literary pretentious sad woman or sad man reflecting about life but in a very pretentious way. um i uh, uh, I hate those novels. I genuinely hate them. And so I always say I don't like books where nothing happens, but I realize that I read a lot of books where nothing happens, like Baudolino, like Tom Lake, like even Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Books where I'm just following the daily lives of people, the lives of people, books that are about life, and in that they are just about day-to-day life, and they are about life. But it's not a pretentious, it's just endearing characters that you fall in love with, that you are invested with, and that you want to spend time with them. That type of book. And this book, I wasn't a big crier. I don't know what happened at what point in my life, but it's kind of like a switch turned on, and now I cry. I cry. And I cried with this book. I was listening to this book, which, okay, I have to mention this. The audiobook is narrated by Meryl Streep. Perfect, perfect narration. It's so you just want to keep listening because it's just a story being told, and because it's a story being told by a mom, and you're just like in the place of the daughters, it's so nice. It's so nice. And she narrates it in a way that's so nice and beautiful and magical. You would think it's recency bias, but it's not. I know because of the themes and stuff that I can't talk about because it would ruin the ending of the book, but because of the themes that are discussed at the end of the book, it hits in a very personal place for me, and so I know there is going to be a favorite book. And because of that, I want to say it's my favorite book of the year. But the reason why I named the book of the year The You Dreamed of Empires is because it's also very associated to my interests this year. Thematically, that was the theme of the year, whereas this one thematically is the themes that interests me or that hit me in life in general. So You Dream of Empires would be the book of the year, and Tom Lake would be like my favorite book, if that makes sense. And that would be it because phew, so long and so hungry. And my voice is leaving me. You can hear. So, so that's where I'm going to leave you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and in the meantime, I wish you happy reading.